The case we're going to talk about today was so absurd that when the whole truth came out, it instantly became a national sensation. The twists that awaited the detectives couldn't have been invented by any screenwriter. Yet, at first, the story seemed trivial. It all began in the small town of Port Orchard, Washington, on the evening of October 15th, 1988. 30-year-old Cheryl Pitre was finishing her shift at the PJ Market store. Cheryl was an ordinary woman. She worked two jobs, raised her children on her own, and always tried to stay positive. In her youth, Cheryl dreamed of becoming a nurse, but life took a different turn. Despite everything, she never lost her warmth for people. All the more tragic, then, to think about how fate treated her. That evening, there were almost no customers. As usual, Cheryl closed the store, got into her car, and drove home. She had no idea that this evening would be her last. And most importantly, the motive behind everything that happened was absolutely unbelievable. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Cheryl's ex husband was awake. He was waiting for the moment he thought would change everything. Roland Peter was very excited. He had an incredibly cunning plan that he believed would help him win back his ex wife. That weekend, their daughter happened to be with Roland, and he noticed how upset she was about her parents not being together. He didn't yet know just how much the events of that night would shock the entire country. The couple had a rather complicated relationship history, and to understand what Cheryl's environment was like, one must understand who Roland was. The couple met 12 years earlier. Handsome and charismatic, Roland impressed his future wife. In fact, he started cheating almost immediately. But it turned out that infidelity was the least of their problems. The thing was, the woman he was cheating with was also married. Then Roland became involved in planning a deadly plot against his lover's husband, but it was thwarted by the police. As a result, he was sentenced to 6 years in prison, and everyone turned their backs on him. The only one who stayed in touch was the trusting and kind hearted Cheryl. Eventually, when Roland was released from prison, he and Cheryl remarried. They had another child, a boy. For a while, they lived happily, but Roland began cheating on his wife again, which led to their second divorce. However, now, on the night of October 15th to 16th, Roland was determined to carry out his plan and reconcile with his wife. No one yet knew that this was the moment from which a true tragedy would begin to unfold. Roland looked at the clock. It was 11:30 p.m. The moment he had been waiting for all day was approaching. But just as he was about to leave the house, he felt terribly unwell. He sat down on the couch and simply lost consciousness until the next morning. It was at that moment that everything spiraled out of control. But you would never guess why exactly the ex-husband's fainting spell determined Cheryl's fate. The man had blood pressure issues, and sometimes when he was extremely anxious, he would feel dizzy. He could even pass out, as happened that evening. Meanwhile, events began to unfold rapidly and irreversibly. The next morning, PJ Market never opened. Cheryl was never late, and both her coworkers and her ex-husband started to worry, especially the latter since he was waiting for her to pick up the kids after the weekend. By evening, it was clear Cheryl was missing. Roland raised the alarm and went to the police. A search of her home turned up nothing. But among the worrying messages on her answering machine, one stood out. An unknown person reported finding Cheryl's purse at Lake Union, an hour's drive from Port Orchard, where Cheryl had neither business nor acquaintances. This was the first real lead. Naturally, the police headed to Lake Union to search for Cheryl. And on October 19th, 3 days after her disappearance, the woman's car was found in one of the parking lots near the lake. After breaking into the trunk of the car, the police discovered Cheryl inside. Sadly, Cheryl had passed away. Naturally, the first suspect was Roland. First, because he was Cheryl's ex-husband, and second, because he already had a criminal record. But he had a very strong alibi. Many people confirmed that he was in Port Orchard, far from Lake Union. After all, his daughter had spent the whole time with him. She may have been a child, but the police believed her. The man fully cooperated with the investigation, and even allowed the police to search his home without a warrant. Nothing suspicious was found there. Roland clearly could not have kidnapped Cheryl. However, he did tell the police one important thing. According to Roland, Cheryl had recently confided in him that she felt someone was watching her, that someone was stalking her. At this point, the case stalled. It took a year before a new lead emerged. A journalist contacted the police. He said he had received a call from a young man who admitted responsibility for what had happened to Cheryl Pitre. The caller did not reveal his name. He simply confessed his involvement and ended the call. It seemed as if the person just needed to get it off his chest. The detectives persuaded the journalist to write an article about the call. Maybe this would prompt the killer to reach out again or lead to another clue. When the article was published, one of Cheryl's former coworkers from her second job contacted the detectives. The colleague said that there was a guy at work who had feelings for Cheryl. Reportedly, his name was Albie Brett Weir. Cheryl had helped this man with his resume, and during that interaction, Albie developed feelings for her. When the police began looking for him, they discovered that he no longer worked there. Moreover, he had quit just 2 days before Cheryl went missing, and on the day her body was found, someone saw Albie with injuries on his arm. In addition, detectives learned something interesting. Albie's father lived near PJ Market. That was Cheryl's first place of work. His mother, on the other hand, lived near Lake Union. That was where Cheryl's car and body were found. At this point, that strange story Roland had told started to make real sense. Cheryl had said she felt like someone was following her before her disappearance. That stalker could very well have been Albie Brett Weir. When police finally managed to find him, Albie was withdrawn and didn't want to cooperate with detectives. All of this seemed incredibly suspicious. Eventually, they got him to talk. As for the injuries, he claimed he got them while fishing. Detectives interviewed those who were with him that day, and they confirmed his story. And overall, despite all the coincidences and oddities, nothing concrete could be found. In the end, the man had to be released, and the case was shelved for many years. Everything changed in 2002, 14 years later. While the case was gathering dust in the archives, an unexpected tip came from a completely different place. In one of the prisons, an inmate approached the authorities with new information. He claimed he knew who was responsible for Cheryl Pitre's death and was willing to share this in exchange for certain privileges. According to this information, it was someone named Frederick McKee. At the time, Frederick was already serving a sentence for another case. Eventually, the police took a biological sample from Frederick McKee and compared it to a sample found at the crime scene. The two samples matched perfectly. Frederick McKee was definitely responsible for what happened to Cheryl. But when the police dug a little deeper into the story, they were stunned. It turned out that the crime committed by Frederick McKee wasn't even the worst part of the story. The real story of what happened to Cheryl Pitre was so insanely senseless that it immediately became a nationwide sensation. First, let me tell you what actually happened to Cheryl. Then I'll give you the explanation for why it happened. Late in the evening on October 15th, 1988, the night Cheryl disappeared, Frederick McKee used a key to enter her home. He waited there for her to come back from work. Then, under his insistence, Cheryl got into the trunk of her vehicle. In the end, he drove Cheryl to Lake Union. Afterward, McKee parked the car in a lot near the lake and left Cheryl's belongings nearby. However, that night wasn't supposed to end this way. Here's how it was supposed to happen. Her ex-husband, Roland, had a plan to win Cheryl back to make them a couple again. His plan was to help Cheryl in a dangerous situation that he himself had staged. To do this, he asked his friend Frederick McKee for help. He gave him a key to Cheryl's house so McKee could be there when she arrived. The plan was for McKee to confront Cheryl as part of the staged event and for Roland to suddenly appear and rescue her. In Roland's mind, this would make Cheryl fall in love with him again. But, as you can imagine, something in this story didn't go according to plan. Namely, just as Roland was about to set out to help Cheryl, his blood pressure spiked Overwhelmed with anxiety, he passed out and didn't wake up until the next morning. Meanwhile, McKee, as he and Roland had agreed, acted decisively. He waited for Roland to show up at Cheryl's house, but Roland never appeared or contacted him. Realizing that staying at Cheryl's home was risky, McKee decided to drive her to a parking lot near Lake Union. He figured Roland could deal with the situation himself now. The next morning, when Roland came to, the first thing he did was call McKee. McKee told him he had waited at Cheryl's house for a long time. When Roland never showed, he had driven her car to Lake Union. Roland immediately rushed to the location, but when he found the car and opened the trunk, he realized Cheryl had tragically died during the night. By the time the police uncovered all of this, Roland was already in prison. And the reason won't surprise you. He had attempted to stage an incident involving his girlfriend's family member in order to appear as a hero. It was a situation eerily similar to what had happened with Cheryl, though fortunately no one died that time. During further investigation, the prosecution presented its own version. According to the prosecution, the plan was not aimed at reconciliation, but at obtaining the insurance money. Whatever the real motives were, Roland Pitre was sentenced to nearly 40 years in prison, while Frederick McKee received a 20-year sentence. Actually, I agree with the prosecutors. I think Roland just wanted the insurance money and he never really planned to save Cheryl. What do you think? Do you believe he had romantic reasons, or do you think it was all about money?